I knew something had changed when I walked into my own family celebration and could not find a place to sit. My name is Helen Parker, and at 69 years old, I never imagined I would feel like a stranger among the people I loved most. Family had always been the center of my life. For decades, every holiday, every birthday, every graduation, and every Sunday dinner had revolved around making sure everyone else felt welcome. I was the one who remembered favorite recipes, mailed birthday cards on time, and showed up whenever someone needed help. I never kept score. At least, I thought I never did. The gathering was supposed to be a simple family celebration. My son Michael and his wife Ashley were hosting a backyard dinner to celebrate their 15th wedding anniversary. Their house sat in a quiet neighborhood outside Indianapolis, with large maple trees lining the street and neatly trimmed lawns stretching in every direction. I spent the entire afternoon baking a peach cobbler using a recipe my late husband loved. It felt good to stay busy. It felt good to contribute. When I arrived, cars already filled the driveway and lined both sides of the street. Laughter drifted from the backyard. Music played softly through outdoor speakers. Everything looked cheerful and welcoming. I carried the cobbler through the side gate and smiled as I greeted relatives and friends. Ashley accepted the dessert with a quick thank you before rushing off to greet someone else. It did not bother me. She was busy hosting. At least, that is what I told myself. The long dinner tables had already been arranged beneath strings of warm lights. White tablecloths fluttered gently in the evening breeze. Place settings covered every available seat. Small name cards rested beside each plate. I scanned the tables, expecting to find my spot. Instead, I found confusion. I walked from one end of the setup to the other. Cousins, neighbors, friends, co-workers, even distant relatives had assigned seats. My name was nowhere. I checked again, thinking I must have overlooked it. Then a third time. Still nothing. Around me, guests continued talking and laughing. Nobody seemed to notice. For a moment, I stood there holding my purse while conversations flowed around me like water moving around a stone. Finally, I spotted a small folding chair pushed against the fence near a side table holding extra napkins and drinks. No place card. No table setting. Just a chair. I looked toward Ashley. She was laughing with a group of guests. Michael was helping someone carry trays of food. Neither looked in my direction. Slowly, I sat down. The chair wobbled slightly on the uneven grass. From where I sat, I could see the entire family gathered together. Children laughed. Glasses clinked. Stories were shared. Yet somehow I felt farther away than if I had stayed home. I told myself it was an oversight. A simple mistake. These things happen. But deep inside, another thought had already begun to form. This did not feel accidental. It felt familiar. As the sun disappeared below the trees and the evening settled over the yard, I noticed someone watching me. Across the table sat my 17-year-old granddaughter Emma. Unlike everyone else, she was not laughing. She was staring directly at the empty space where my seat should have been. Emma kept looking at me throughout the evening. Every time I glanced in her direction, she quickly looked away, but not before I caught the concern in her eyes. It was a small thing, yet it stayed with me. The dinner continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Plates were passed around. Stories were shared. Guests laughed at old memories. From a distance, it probably looked like a perfect family celebration. Sitting alone beside the supply table, I tried to convince myself that it was exactly that. I told myself the missing seat was an oversight. I told myself nobody intended to hurt me. I told myself many things that night. The problem was that I had told myself the same things before. As I watched everyone gather together beneath the string lights, memories began surfacing one after another. Not dramatic memories. Small ones. The kind that are easy to ignore when they happen. Last Thanksgiving, I learned about dinner plans from a social media post after the meal had already happened. Ashley apologized and claimed there had been confusion about the invitation. The previous Christmas, gift exchanges had been organized through a family group chat that somehow never included me. Michael said it was an accident. A year before that, Emma's school performance had come and gone without anyone mentioning the date. When I asked about it afterward, Ashley looked genuinely surprised and said she thought someone had told me. At the time, I accepted every explanation because I wanted to believe them. Families make mistakes. People get busy. Life becomes complicated. Yet sitting there alone that evening, I suddenly realized something unsettling. Every explanation had sounded different, but every outcome had been exactly the same. I was always the one left out. The sun had completely disappeared by the time dessert was served. My peach cobbler sat in the center of the main table while compliments drifted across the yard. Several guests praised it. Ashley accepted those compliments with a smile and casually mentioned how helpful it was to have family contribute. Helpful. The word bothered me more than it should have. Not loved. Not appreciated. Helpful. Like I was some extra set of hands brought in to assist. After dessert, people began gathering in small groups around the yard. Michael spent most of the evening talking with friends from work. Ashley moved effortlessly between conversations, laughing and hosting. Nobody was intentionally rude. That was the strange part. Nobody ignored me directly. They simply moved through the evening without noticing whether I was included. Around 9 o'clock, I decided to leave. I quietly collected my purse and walked toward the side gate. Before I reached it, I heard someone call my name. Grandma. I turned and saw Emma hurrying across the lawn. Her expression was serious. Are you leaving already? She asked. It is getting late. She glanced back toward the tables. I am sorry about tonight. My heart skipped slightly. What do you mean? Emma hesitated. For a moment, she looked much older than 17. The chair. I forced a small smile. It was not a big deal. She stared at me for several seconds. Then she shook her head. Yes, it was. The certainty in her voice caught me off guard. I did not know how to respond. Emma lowered her voice. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course. She glanced toward the house to make sure nobody was listening. Then she looked back at me. Have you ever wondered why these things always seem to happen to you and never to anyone else? Emma's question followed me all the way home. The streets were quiet as I drove through familiar neighborhoods illuminated by porch lights and television glow. Normally, I enjoyed those evening drives. They gave me time to think. That night, however, one sentence kept repeating in my mind. Why do these things always seem to happen to you and never to anyone else? When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for several minutes without moving. The engine was off. The house was dark, yet I remained there, staring through the windshield as memories surfaced one after another. There was the family vacation planning meeting I somehow never heard about until reservations had already been made. There was the restaurant celebration where everyone else knew the location except me. There was the graduation dinner where a seat had accidentally been forgotten. Individually, each incident seemed small. Together, they formed something much larger. The next morning, I woke early and made coffee. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window while birds gathered around the feeder outside. Usually that view brought comfort. Instead, I found myself replaying Emma's expression. She had not looked confused. She had looked certain. That realization bothered me more than anything else. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was Emma. Grandma, are you home? I stared at the message for a moment before replying. 20 minutes later, she was sitting across from me at my kitchen table. She looked nervous. Not the kind of nervousness that comes from getting in trouble. The kind that comes from carrying information you do not know how to share. I placed a plate of cookies between us. Neither of us touched them. Finally, Emma took a deep breath. I have wanted to tell you something for a long time. My stomach tightened. What is it? She looked down at her hands. People talk about you differently when you are not around. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background. Outside, a lawnmower passed somewhere down the street. Ordinary sounds. Yet suddenly the room felt very still. Differently how? I asked. Emma hesitated. They do not think of you the way you think they do. The words stung more than I expected. Who is they? Some relatives. Some family friends. People Mom talks to. Mom. She did not have to say Ashley's name. We both knew who she meant. Emma looked genuinely uncomfortable. Grandma, a lot of people think you are lonely and dependent. They think Dad has to constantly take care of you. I blinked. What? She nodded slowly. Some people think you cannot manage things on your own. I stared at her. The idea was absurd. My mortgage had been paid off years ago. I handled my own finances. I volunteered twice a week at the local library. My calendar was often busier than Michael's. Yet as shocking as the statement sounded, something inside me recognized it immediately. Suddenly, dozens of strange conversations from previous years made sense. The sympathetic looks, the awkward comments, the assumptions. Emma swallowed hard. There is something else. My chest tightened. What? She looked directly into my eyes. A few months ago, I overheard Mom talking to one of her friends. She called you a burden. The room seemed to fall silent. Not because Emma raised her voice, because she did not. She said it quietly, honestly, and somehow that made the word hurt even more. Burden. I sat there staring at the untouched cookies while the word echoed through my mind. Then Emma said something that changed everything. The worst part is that I do not think most people know it is not true. After Emma left that afternoon, I sat alone at my kitchen table for a very long time. The cookies remained untouched between us, exactly where she had left them. Outside, the world continued as normal. A delivery truck rolled down the street. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Wind moved gently through the trees. Yet inside my home, something fundamental had shifted. The word burden refused to leave my mind. Not because it was cruel, because it explained too much. Over the next several days, I found myself looking backward instead of forward. I thought about Michael as a little boy sitting at this same kitchen table doing homework while I worked a second job to help cover expenses after his father was laid off. I remembered driving him to baseball practice 4 nights a week. I remembered staying awake through illnesses, helping with college applications, and taking extra shifts when tuition bills arrived. None of those memories felt like sacrifices at the time. They felt like love. Parents do not keep score. At least, they are not supposed to. One evening, I opened an old photo album that had not left the shelf in years. Dust covered the binding. Inside were decades of family photographs. Michael's first day of kindergarten, his high school graduation, his wedding day, the birth of Emma. As I turned the pages, I noticed something strange. The older photographs felt warmer somehow, more connected. In those pictures, I was not standing on the edge of the frame. I was part of the center, part of the story. Somewhere along the way, that changed. The realization followed me throughout the week. During a volunteer shift at the library, I caught myself replaying conversations from previous years. Casual remarks that once seemed harmless suddenly sounded different. I remembered a family friend telling me how fortunate I was to have Michael looking after me. I remembered a neighbor complimenting Ashley for being so patient and supportive. At the time, I had smiled politely and changed the subject. Now I wondered why those assumptions had existed in the first place. By Friday, another uncomfortable thought began taking shape. If people believed I was dependent, someone had to be telling them that story. The following Sunday, I attended church as usual. After the service, several members of the congregation gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and conversation. I had known many of these people for years. They were kind, familiar faces. Safe faces. Yet even there, I noticed things I had overlooked before. One woman asked whether Michael was still helping me manage my finances. Another mentioned how difficult it must be for Ashley to balance caring for both children and an aging parent. Neither comment was malicious. Both were spoken with genuine sympathy. That was what made them so unsettling. They believed what they were saying. Someone had convinced them it was true. I drove home feeling heavier than when I left. That evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Michael's name. We exchanged small talk for a few minutes. Weather, work, weekend plans, normal conversation. Then something happened that made my stomach tighten. "Mom," he said casually, "Ashley mentioned you seemed upset at the anniversary dinner." I stared out the window. Did she? She is worried about you. The sentence sounded innocent enough, yet something about it felt rehearsed, familiar, as though concern had become another way of describing me. Before ending the call, Michael added one final comment. "You know, everyone is just trying to help." After we hung up, I sat quietly in my living room as darkness settled outside. Help, support, burden. The same themes kept appearing in different forms. For the first time, I began wondering whether the story people believed about me had been growing for years without my knowledge. And if that was true, I needed to find out who had been writing it. The question stayed with me throughout the following week. Who had been writing that story? Every time someone spoke about helping me, supporting me, or worrying about me, I heard the same pattern. Different words, same message. Somehow, over the years, I had become the fragile character in a story that did not belong to me. I stopped dismissing things. Instead, I started paying attention. The next Thursday, Emma came over after school. We sat on the back porch drinking iced tea while the afternoon sun stretched across the yard. She seemed hesitant, as though she was deciding whether to continue a conversation that had already gone further than she intended. Finally, she looked at me. "Grandma, can I tell you something without you getting upset?" I smiled faintly. "You can tell me anything." She lowered her voice. "A lot of people think Mom does. Everything for you. I stared at her. Everything. Emma nodded. They think she helps with your bills. They think she manages things for you. Some people even think she drives you to appointments. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. I had been driving myself for over 50 years. My finances were organized down to the last dollar. I paid my own bills online every month. Yet hearing Emma describe those assumptions explained countless interactions I had never understood. How do people get those ideas? I asked quietly. Emma looked uncomfortable. Mom talks about you a lot. The answer landed heavily between us. What does she say? Emma hesitated. Mostly little things. Things that sound caring. Like how she worries about you. How she checks on you. How she helps you stay organized. Nothing sounds mean when she says it. I leaned back in my chair. That made sense. Truly manipulative stories rarely sound cruel. They sound compassionate. They sound reasonable. They sound helpful. A few days later, I experienced another strange moment. I was shopping at the grocery store when I ran into one of Ashley's friends. We exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes before she smiled warmly and said something that stopped me cold. You are lucky to have Ashley looking after you. I smiled automatically. Years of politeness took over before my mind caught up. Looking after me? The woman nodded. She talks about you all the time. Then she added something else. Not everyone would take on that responsibility. Responsibility. The word bothered me for the rest of the day. That evening, I sat at my dining room table with a notebook and began writing down every strange comment I could remember from the past several years. The list grew surprisingly fast. Support, responsibility, sacrifice, help, caretaking. The same themes appeared again and again. Around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was Emma. Grandma, I found something. My pulse quickened slightly. What? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her message arrived. I was helping Mom clean out old files in the office. I found printed copies of community newsletters. Several articles had her quoted talking about supporting elderly family members. I stared at the screen. Another message appeared. Grandma, your name was mentioned more than once. I looked around my quiet house. The ticking clock, the family photographs, the familiar furniture. Everything suddenly felt different. Not because I had discovered proof. Because for the first time, I realized this story might be much bigger than family dinners and private conversations. Then Emma sent one final message. And there is something else. I do not think Mom expected anyone to find it. I did not sleep much that night. Emma's final message lingered in my mind long after I turned off the lights. I do not think Mom expected anyone to find it. The sentence carried a weight that felt different from everything that had come before. Up until now, I had been collecting impressions, comments, assumptions, fragments of conversations. But Emma sounded as though she had found something tangible, something real. The next afternoon, she came over carrying a large manila envelope. Her expression was serious. We sat at the kitchen table where so many important conversations seemed to happen lately. For a moment, she simply stared at the envelope. Then she slid it toward me. I made copies, she said quietly. My hands felt strangely cold as I opened it. Inside were several printed newsletters from local community organizations. I immediately recognized Ashley's name. She had always been involved in charity work, fundraising events, and neighborhood committees. Over the years, I had admired her energy. Now I began reading more carefully. In one article, Ashley was praised for balancing family responsibilities while supporting an aging relative. In another, she discussed the importance of caring for family members who could no longer fully care for themselves. The wording was subtle. My name appeared only occasionally. Yet the implication was unmistakable. Anyone reading these articles would assume I depended heavily on my son and daughter-in-law. I looked up from the papers. People actually read this. Emma nodded. These newsletters go everywhere. Community centers, churches, volunteer groups. My stomach tightened. Suddenly, the comments from church made sense. The assumptions at family gatherings made sense. Even strangers seemed to have absorbed a version of my life that barely resembled reality. I continued reading. The deeper I went, the more uncomfortable I became. Ashley never directly lied. That was what made everything so effective. She simply positioned herself as a caregiver and allowed people to fill in the blanks. One article described the emotional challenges of helping elderly family members maintain independence. Another praised her dedication to supporting family through difficult circumstances. The picture being painted was clear. Ashley was the patient caretaker. I was the person requiring care. Emma reached into the envelope again. There is one more thing. She handed me several printed emails. My eyes moved slowly across the pages. They appeared to be correspondence between Ashley and organizers from a community leadership award program. The award recognized people making meaningful contributions to families and neighborhoods. Ashley had been nominated twice. One recommendation letter praised her ongoing commitment to supporting an elderly relative facing daily challenges. Another highlighted her personal sacrifices in helping family members who struggled to remain independent. I stared at the pages in disbelief. My entire identity had become supporting evidence in someone else's success story. Not because it was true, because it was useful. For several minutes, neither Emma nor I spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. Grandma, I do not think she ever expected anyone to compare those stories to reality. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back into the envelope. For the first time since this began, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. The pieces were finally fitting together. This was bigger than forgotten invitations or missing seats at family dinners. A narrative had been built over years. A reputation had been constructed one conversation at a time. And the most unsettling part was that many people genuinely believed it. As Emma prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked down at the growing stack of documents on my table. Then I looked back at her. "First," I said quietly, "I am going to find out exactly how far this story has spread." Over the next 2 weeks, I stopped looking for explanations and started looking for facts. What surprised me most was not what I discovered. It was how calm I felt while discovering it. For years, I had spent energy trying to be included, trying to avoid misunderstandings, trying to keep everyone comfortable. Now, for the first time, I was simply observing. The more I observed, the clearer everything became. I began attending the same activities I had always enjoyed. Volunteer shifts at the library, church events, community lunches. But instead of dismissing strange comments, I listened carefully. Again and again, people described me in ways that felt unfamiliar. One woman told me she admired my courage despite my limitations. Another said she was glad Michael and Ashley were willing to sacrifice so much for family. A retired couple complimented Ashley for remaining patient with an aging parent. None of them were being cruel. In fact, most were being kind. That was what made it so revealing. They genuinely believed they understood my life. One afternoon, I met an old friend named Carol for lunch. We had worked together at the school district for nearly 20 years. Carol knew me before Michael graduated college, before Ashley entered the family, before any of these stories existed. Halfway through lunch, she set down her coffee cup and looked at me carefully. "You seem different lately." I smiled. "Do I?" She nodded. "Lighter." The word caught me off guard. Lighter. She was right. Somewhere between discovering the truth and accepting it, something had changed. I no longer felt responsible for correcting every misunderstanding. I no longer felt desperate to be appreciated. The realization was strangely freeing. That evening, I walked through my house with fresh eyes. Photographs covered the walls. Shelves held decades of memories. Yet for the first time, I noticed something else. My life was full, not because of my family, because of me. I had friends, hobbies, purpose, independence. Somewhere along the way, I had allowed myself to believe that being included by family was the same thing as having value. They were not the same thing at all. Over the following month, I quietly made changes. I joined a local travel group for retirees. I signed up for an art class I had postponed for years. I accepted invitations I normally declined. My calendar became surprisingly busy. The funny thing was that nobody in the family seemed to notice. Days passed without calls. Weeks passed without invitations. The silence no longer hurt. It simply confirmed what I already knew. Then something unexpected happened. One Saturday morning, Michael called. His voice sounded stressed. "Mom, do you have a minute?" I immediately recognized the difference. This was not a casual check-in. Something was wrong. Of course. He hesitated. Ashley usually handles a lot of things for the family events and community projects. Lately, everything has become overwhelming. I listened quietly. He continued describing scheduling problems, volunteer commitments, childcare conflicts, and growing pressure from several organizations Ashley worked with. As he spoke, I realized something important. For years, Ashley had built her reputation around helping others. Now those responsibilities were multiplying faster than she could manage them. Before ending the call, Michael said something that made me pause. Honestly, Mom, I do not know how we are going to keep up with everything. After we hung up, I sat by the window watching the afternoon sunlight settle across my garden. For the first time in years, nobody was asking me to prove my worth. Nobody was asking me to earn my place. Life was simply moving forward. And somewhere in the distance, I could feel the first signs of a family beginning to understand what happens when they stop noticing someone who has quietly held everything together. The turning point arrived sooner than I expected. It began with a phone call from Emma on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was returning from my art class when my phone rang. Her voice sounded anxious. "Grandma, something happened." My heart immediately tightened. "What is it?" There was a pause. Mom was supposed to organize the annual community fundraiser this weekend. Everything is falling apart. I listened quietly as Emma explained. Vendors had not been confirmed. Volunteers were confused about schedules. Several important details had been overlooked. The event had grown far larger than Ashley originally anticipated. Normally, none of this would have concerned me. But then Emma said something interesting. "People keep asking where you are." I stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "A lot of the volunteers remember working with you years ago. They assumed you were helping organize things." I looked out across the parking lot while rain tapped softly against nearby cars. For years, I had quietly helped coordinate school events, church dinners, fundraising drives, and community projects. Not because I wanted recognition, because I enjoyed contributing. Most people never noticed who handled the details behind the scenes. Things simply worked. Now, for the first time, those details were being missed. 2 days later, Michael called again. This time, he sounded exhausted. "Mom, I need your advice." Advice. Not help. Not support. Advice. The distinction mattered more than he realized. For nearly an hour, he described problems with the fundraiser. Missed deadlines. Volunteer confusion. Budget concerns. Community expectations. When he finally stopped talking, I smiled to myself. Nearly every issue he described involved skills I had spent decades developing. Planning, communication, organization, relationship building. Skills that had quietly benefited countless family events over the years. Yet nobody had ever connected those successes to me. They simply happened. "What do you think we should do?" Michael asked. I offered several suggestions. Simple solutions. Practical steps. By the end of the conversation, his voice sounded noticeably calmer. "I do not know what we would do without you," he said before hanging up. The irony was impossible to miss. The following Saturday, I attended the fundraiser as a guest. Nothing more. I arrived carrying a small donation envelope and took a seat near the back. The event was beautiful, but the strain showed. Volunteers rushed between tasks. Schedules changed repeatedly. Small mistakes accumulated throughout the afternoon. None of it was catastrophic. It was simply obvious that something important was missing. Several people approached me throughout the event. Some remembered previous projects we had worked on together. Others thanked me for helping organize successful events years earlier. One woman smiled warmly and said, "We always assumed Ashley learned all of this from you." I almost laughed. Learned from me. The phrase lingered in my thoughts. As the afternoon continued, I noticed Ashley growing increasingly frustrated. Her carefully controlled image was slipping under the pressure. Nothing dramatic happened. No confrontation. No argument. Just visible stress. For years, people had seen her as the person holding everything together. Now they were beginning to notice how much support she had quietly received from others. Near the end of the event, I saw Michael standing alone beside the refreshment table. He looked tired, older somehow. When our eyes met, he walked over. "Mom," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." He hesitated. "How did you make all of this look so easy for so many years?" The question caught me completely off guard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I smiled gently. "Because nobody notices the work when everything is functioning properly." Michael stared at me for several seconds. And for the first time in a very long time, I had the distinct feeling that he was finally starting to see me clearly. The conversation with Michael stayed with me long after the fundraiser ended. For days afterward, I noticed small changes. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone else would have recognized. Yet they were there. Michael called more often. Not because he needed something. Because he wanted to talk. He asked about my art class. He asked about the travel group. He asked questions that had nothing to do with family obligations or community projects. For the first time in years, I felt like he was speaking to me instead of speaking around me. Ashley, on the other hand, became unusually quiet. The endless stories about sacrifice seemed to disappear. The comments about helping and supporting me became less frequent. It was as though reality had quietly entered the room and refused to leave. A month later, Emma called with unexpected news. The family was planning another gathering. This time it was a large birthday celebration for one of my cousins. Nearly everyone would be there. As I prepared that afternoon, I felt strangely calm. Not nervous, not hopeful, simply calm. I no longer needed the event to prove anything. When I arrived at the restaurant, I immediately noticed something different. A large private room had been reserved for the family. Long tables stretched across the room beneath warm lighting. Place cards had been arranged carefully beside each setting. Conversations filled the air. Laughter echoed from every corner. Then I saw it. Near the center of the main table sat a place card with my name written clearly across the front. Not hidden near the edge. Not placed beside a supply station. Right in the middle with everyone else. I stared at it for a moment. Emma noticed first. She smiled from across the room. Michael followed her gaze and looked directly at me. There was something in his expression I had not seen in a long time. Recognition. Not guilt. Not pity. Recognition. As dinner continued, relatives approached to chat. Some asked about my recent travels. Others wanted to hear about my volunteer work or art projects. The conversations felt different because they were based on who I actually was rather than the version of me they had been told about. Halfway through the evening, Ashley walked over carrying a cup of coffee. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sat down beside me. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. The words seemed difficult for her to say. I looked at her calmly. She continued staring into her coffee. "I think somewhere along the way I stopped seeing how much you contributed. I focused too much on how things looked." The statement was not perfect. It was not a dramatic confession, but it was honest enough. Years earlier, I might have waited for a larger apology, a more satisfying explanation. Now I realized I did not need either. "Thank you," I said simply. Ashley nodded and returned to the table. The conversation ended there. It did not need to become anything more. Later that evening, as people prepared to leave, I noticed something that made me smile. My chair remained occupied until the very end of the gathering. Nobody forgot it. Nobody overlooked it. Yet the truth was that the chair no longer mattered. The real change had happened much earlier. It happened the moment I stopped measuring my worth by other people's attention. It happened when I stopped chasing inclusion and started building a life that belonged to me. As I drove home beneath the glow of streetlights, I felt a peace I had not experienced in years. The family had finally begun to see me differently. But that was not the greatest victory. The greatest victory was that I had learned to see myself clearly again. And once that happened, nobody could ever make me feel invisible for long.